Welcome to the 7th annual Voices of Experience Speaker Series. I'm Chris Reardon, Dean of the Daniels College of Business. I think many of you have heard me say that this series is one of my favorite events. It brings together our students, our faculty, our staff, our alumni, our corporate partners, and our community partners. The series was started 7 years ago by Dr. Sam Cassidy. Its vision was to bring to our community the experiences of significant leaders. We felt that we wanted to share with the community their experiences in leadership, ethics, and most importantly, the big issues facing our business world and our community today. The 7th annual series promises to be no less than that. We have an exciting series planned. Tonight we start with our Lieutenant Governor of the state of Colorado, Barbara O'Brien. We follow in November with the CEO of Molson Coors. We reconvene in January for a healthcare panel with the president of Kaiser Foundation, the CEO of Denver Health, and the CEO of Centura Health. In February, we have the CEO of Grant Thornton, one of our sponsoring companies. We also bring in March a General. And we also bring in April the CEO of Enterprise Cars and the CEO of Ralston Purina. Should be a pretty exciting series, wouldn't you say? I'd like to take a moment to thank the people that helped make this possible. It certainly is a part of our community, and we have many corporate sponsors that are generous in our support. I'd like to acknowledge Grant Thornton, First Bank, CoBank, JP Morgan Chase, and the Rocky Mountain Human Resource people in Strategy. Please join me in offering them a warm thanks for their support of this series. We also have some in-kind partners on this event: the National Association of Corporate Directors, Ethisphere, the Denver Metro Chamber of Commerce, Net Impact, Sturm College of Law, and the DU Business Law Society. Many of you are here tonight for continuing education credits, and I'll remind you that you can pick up your forms in the front lobby after the event is over. Tonight's event will follow our usual format. We'll have our speaker, and then we'll entertain question and answer. We will have staff walking around the room with microphones to answer your questions, so please hold up your hand, and then we will follow with a reception in our lobby. Tonight's speaker, the Lieutenant Governor of the state of Colorado, really represents one of the biggest issues that we are facing today as a state and a country: education reform. Barbara O'Brien is a passionate, dedicated, purposeful leader who has an attitude of bring it on when it comes to education and healthcare reform in this state. She has been working on these issues for over 25 years, and she has made significant progress both in her previous role as an advocate as well as a lieutenant governor. She's worked diligently to improve school nutrition, to increase physical activity. She's focused on childhood obesity. She's led the Governor's Commission on Community Service, among many other activities. She's one of my favorite people and one of my most respected, admired leaders. Please join me in offering a very warm welcome for our Lieutenant Governor, Barbara O'Brien.
Thank you very much, Dean Reardon, and the whole University of Denver community that is such a partner in everything we try and do in the Metro Denver area and truly in the whole region of the Rocky Mountains. It's wonderful to have this jewel of a university right here in the heart of Colorado. I'm here tonight with a great deal of humility, because I've heard some of the other people in this series speak, and they all sound like they have a plan and they have the will to execute. And I'm standing here before you as a person who never had a single plan about my own career actually turn out. But I think that's as valuable a lesson as sometimes setting a plan and never diverging from it. I grew up loving to read and literature. At every grade, I thought, that's the English teacher I want to be, whether it was 2nd grade or 10th grade or graduate school. And I liked school so much that I just kept going until I got a PhD and they forced me out. But I realized after I had completed my graduate work that I really wasn't a scholar. And as much as I love to do reading and research and writing, 30 years doing scholarly work probably wasn't the right fit with me. So I did what every good English major does. I went out and bought a book on how you make a career change. And because of the lovely people at our wonderful independent bookstore, Tattered Cover, they steered me to, I didn't know it at the time, but an absolute classic. What Color Is Your Parachute? And I followed it like the good student that I was every step of the way. It's mainly about informed networking. And it ended up with me getting, as my first real job after being in academics, as speechwriter to the governor of Colorado, Richard D. Lamb, who of course is now here at DU as a professor of public policy. But what happened was that I was exposed to politics and policy and got bitten by the bug. And it was one of these, you know, when you know the fit is right for you, you throw yourself into it. And I didn't feel that fit of being about a scholar of literature. I felt it about public policy and loved the whole arena of how do you advocate for things you believe in and how do you try and create solutions to problems, and focused over time primarily on education and health, which is probably the only constant that's been with me in my career. So fast forward, I end up working for Governor Lamb. I end up running a child advocacy organization called the Colorado Children's Campaign, which has the mission of advocating for children at the margins of society, primarily on health and education. And I get a call from the Denver District Attorney, Bill Ritter, who said he wanted to get together. And I knew he was thinking of running for governor. And I thought, okay, I'll go brief him on health and education, and then I'll get back to work. And then I got busy, and it wasn't convenient, so I canceled. Well, this happened 3 times. And on the 4th time, he left a message for me. So this is before cell phones and all of that. And he said, I'm going to be sitting at a certain Starbucks downtown, and I'm going to sit here until you come. They close at 11 at night. And if you're not there by 11, they have chairs outside, and I will sit outside until you come. And I thought, oh, now I've got to go. I've got to give him the briefing. I probably have to make a donation to his campaign. So I show up, briefcase packed full, and he said, put your reports away. I want you to run for lieutenant governor with me. And I want you to help me make children one of the top priorities of our administration. He had no doubt he was going to win. And it threw me into a bit of a tizzy because I loved my job. I had no intention of leaving. I'd never run for any office before. But what do? Do you stay comfortable? Or do you roll the dice on something that, if it works out, would be absolutely incredible? So needless to say, I rolled the dice with the help of my husband, who's here tonight. And I have to say that what we've been able to accomplish, especially in this economic downturn, has been one of the most fulfilling things I've ever done. We got more kids who are struggling in chaotic families into preschool. We created the state's first full-day kindergarten program. We're one of only 2 or 3 states in the whole country that actually increased the number of children and youth who were getting health care during this downturn, while every other state saw their number of kids drop. We created the nation's first, it's called dual enrollment program. It means that kids could be in high school, getting a high school diploma, and studying for an associate's degree in a community college for free, because they're still public school students, so they can graduate from high school with either credits toward college, so it's a little less expensive, or toward an AA degree that lets them go out into the workforce and get a better job. I am really proud of that. There were some big things we've been able to do, but there have been some little things that have been almost as gratifying. I discovered that when you're in an office like the Lieutenant Governor's office, people think they can come talk to you and you can perform magic of some sort. And I discovered that actually you can. And I ended up calling it sprinkling fairy dust. And the example that makes me smile whenever I think of it was the Colorado Association of Watercolorists. And it turns out that there are associations for everything, and they all have their own newsletters. It is amazing how club-oriented Americans are. But anyway, the Association of Watercolorists had to meet, and they came in and said, "We're afraid our art is dying out. The students aren't learning how to watercolor. Look at us, we're all older than 70. When we're gone, it will be gone. What can we do?" And I said, "Paint more. Go make more watercolors. Paint like your life depended on it. Get people excited. You know, it's worthwhile. Thank you for doing that." And they were very excited, and they left the office chattering about how they were going to paint even more. I didn't do a thing to help them. I just made them feel as if what they did was important. And how they figure out how to keep watercoloring alive will be up to them. But at least they felt honored, and I think energized to continue on. And I could tell you 50 stories like that one of wonderful people in Colorado who feel they're not recognized or life is passing them on, and they just need a little fairy dust. But I had an idea from that exchange, and I think this is part of the career I'm going to end up talking with you about, how you build on little things. I decided that maybe what I could do is turn my office into an art gallery and have rotating exhibits from Colorado artists so that the thousands of people who come into the Capitol, and hundreds of them are school students, could see Colorado artists in a fancy office and maybe feel that that's something they could include in their lives as well. So I found a partner in the Colorado Council on the Arts. We decided to have 4 quarterly art shows from different regions of the state with a reception with apple juice, just like you'd have a reception but without the wine in a gallery anywhere in Denver. So it's amazing what you can do when you build on the little things in between pushing hard on the really big things. There have also been some things I never would have expected from this job, like protocol training. The First Lady and I got training in what you do at a state dinner, and I actually learned the most, again, from my husband about getting ready for these. You find out not only what is the issue they want to talk about, but what's the sports situation like. And I've had more conversations with Jordanian princes and Slovakian ambassadors about their soccer teams, which led to better discussions about water and agriculture, but it's finding that human connection. So how to make a state dinner work. And I think the key to these meetings, again, comes back to the right book. Having a world atlas in my office. So when people come in and they can't speak English, you can open to a map of their country and they will immediately point to where they live. And it's another connection and a starting point. So it has been a wonderful ride, but I want my private life back. This is the only elected office I've ever had. So on January 11th at about noon, there will be a new lieutenant governor, and I will be back to being a private citizen working on health and education reform from some other venue. So how does someone who really wanted to be an English teacher end up as a lieutenant governor? Beyond the need for luck and hard work. I want to take you back to 1957 and tell you about the best natural executive I've ever met. And I'm going to ask you to imagine with me. Imagine a 28-year-old woman, 4 children, stricken by polio. She's paralyzed from the neck down and unable to breathe without a respirator. 2 years in a public polio hospital, much of that in an iron lung. Your farmer husband comes to take you back to the small farming community you and your family live in. It's 200 miles to get any kind of specialized care. You wonder how you're going to re-engage with life. Now remember, 28, can't move or breathe without help, 4 children, and a farmer for a husband. And here's what that woman, my mother, said to my grandmother. Everyone will visit me once out of pity. They'll only come back if I'm the best conversationalist in town. I want to repeat that. Everyone will visit me once out of pity. They'll only come back if I'm the best conversationalist in town. Notice the cool analysis of the situation, the ambitious yet practical goal. And she did it. For 30 years, our living room was full of people who dropped by to talk about books and politics and even their own problems, if you can imagine that. She taught bridge. On election years, she ran the phone list. They didn't have phone banks back then, of people phone calling for our town's Get Out the Vote. Now, in my perspective, it was for the wrong party, but hey, she was involved. And she was lucky that technology worked for her. She watched television. I think television had only been out for a couple of years. Arm supports were made because there were so many polio patients, technology was advancing, and she could use the eraser end of a pencil to turn pages of books. And a nurse gave her life-saving advice. Mom was worried that she wouldn't be able to do anything, wouldn't be a mother to her children. And the nurse told her, "You are still you. Let others be your arms and legs." My dad used to say things like, "Mom made a really good dinner tonight." And one time I argued back with him that the kids made the dinner. We did the chopping, we did the stirring, we did all the cooking. But he would have absolutely nothing of that. She was the idea person, he insisted. Now there's a clear message to your children about what's important. And being an English major, when I first read Milton, who wrote, "The mind can make a heaven of hell or a hell of heaven," I immediately thought of my mother. She could have focused on her condition and the limitations of sitting in our living room all day, but instead her world was wherever her mind wanted to go. She found people who would execute for her. My grandmother bought our groceries every week. My aunt ran all our family's errands. Her best friend took our 4 kids and her 3 shopping for back-to-school clothes. I have many, many pictures from elementary school of the daughter from the other family and me wearing the exact same clothes in picture after picture. Her mother would say, 2 of those, 2 t-shirts, 2 shorts, done. And she was curious about everything. So another friend always bought the best-selling and prize-winning books and brought them to her so that she could keep up with events and ideas. And all of this happened within a broader sense of community than I fear our country has now. We're very quick to cast blame these days. But when my dad checked my mom out of the polio hospital where she had been for 2 years, there was no charge. And the woman in billing told him he didn't owe anything. He needed to focus on getting his family back on its feet. Imagine how that would be handled today. And I think the contrast is worth contemplating. So it is particularly gratifying to me that the Ritter-O'Brien administration accomplished so much in the healthcare arena. We worked with the Hospital Association to find coverage for 100,000 previously uninsured people, adults and kids. We hit our goal for immunizing children, which includes the polio vaccine. Clearly, my mom and our community responded in a way to that challenge that had a lasting effect on me because I was such a beneficiary of it. But it was part of how we coped. And part of that was my dad. And I want to tell you a quick story about him. So he's a farmer. He's 31. He's dealing with a polio-stricken wife, 4 kids, and farming duties. And farming, as most of you know, doesn't take a day off. He was usually out of the house by 4:30 in the morning. He said that taking mom anywhere was like planning the Normandy invasion. But one day he said we ought to go on a picnic. So off we went with mom, her wheelchair, her respirators, the battery, the backup battery, the 4 kids, the dog, and the food. And when we were done, getting back home was like the Normandy landing in reverse. Mom, wheelchair, respirator, you get the picture. While he was getting mom back in the car and all of her stuff, it was always our job to pick up, make sure we didn't forget anything. And Dad pointed out that we had left some trash on the ground. My brother protested that it wasn't our trash, it was there when we got there. And my dad said, then we'll leave it better than we found it. So there we were, our Normandy landing group, and he was looking for more work to do. And he wouldn't even benefit from it. It would just be better for whoever came along next. He also went everywhere with a shovel, just in case a weed needed digging up or a rattlesnake was near the road. You deal with rattlesnakes out in the country, or a tractor was stuck. He even dug my boyfriend's car out of the mud one summer evening when we were frog hunting and got stuck. But that's another story, and the boy is now my husband. I was reminded of my dad the other day when I read in the Denver Post about an octogenarian rancher in Colorado, Wanda Walker. And she said to the Denver Post reporter, I am for sure satisfied with my life. I can't complain, she says, as she sets out on her early morning chores, carrying an ever-present pair of gloves in a bucket. It's a Walker maxim that no matter where you go, there's going to be something you need to do that you need your gloves. It's a simple work ethic that work is good, that fixing things is good, that leaving it better than you found it is good. So you do it, even when you're tired. And think of all the ways that leave it better than you found it applies to daily life. At a minimum, wouldn't the office lunchroom be better if everyone lived by leave it better than you found it? The habit of leaving it better reflects a relationship with the world that's engaged, responsible, and future-oriented. It means you have the vision and the maturity to imagine what better might be. It means you embrace responsibility for shaping the future, whether it's for a day or a decade. This belief that a person can make things better, in fact, that a person is responsible for making them better, has been the driving force behind my career. I started out wanting to be a teacher because I wanted everyone to love to read as much as I did. But I fell in love with public policy because you can have such an impact on the very quality of life in a state, how people get educated, how they get their health care met, how we balance energy and the environment, things that are crucial to the future of Colorado. And everyone can find a place where they can make a little difference by just imagining, when they look at something, how they might make a little bit better. But you have to be patient, and you have to be willing to search for a different way to do something. And I think this ethic of leaving it better than you find it is also connected to this curiosity that really was the life force for my mother. You won't be very effective if you think you have all the answers, but you need to make room in your life to do a little bit of searching. And if you ask a question, you need to be patient enough to really listen. And you will irritate your colleagues no end if you ask questions and then refuse to truly listen. Being curious isn't quick or efficient, and in our fast-paced world, it might feel like a luxury, but it's the thing that can keep life fresh for you over the 30, 40, 50 years that we will all be working. There's someone whose curiosity, I think, was just an example of how boundless it could be. And I want to read you a little bio. Richard Phillips Feynman was an American physicist known for his work in the path integral formulation of quantum mechanics, the theory of quantum electrodynamics, and the physics of the superfluidity of supercooled liquid helium. He received the Nobel Prize in 1965, but he also studied Maya hieroglyphics. He was a prankster, a juggler, a safe cracker. He cracked safes in Los Alamos, if you can imagine that. He was a bongo drum player, a painter, and even developed his own pickup artist method, which he tested in bars around the world. So clearly, Richard Feynman was a very smart and curious man. And I don't think any of us, if we just start asking more questions, are going to end up being Nobel laureates in physics. But I'm fascinated by something he wrote in his biography. Every day, his mother would ask him, what questions had he asked in school? And I was thunderstruck when I read that. I had always asked my kids, how was school? What did you do today? Very unimaginative. And I got the answers I deserved. Fine, nothing. Imagine starting a family from the beginning where thoughtful questions are treasured and you share them, or in an office with our colleagues, or with new employees that we have a chance to mentor. The problem is that it takes time to ask a meaningful question. You have to have paid attention to something. You have to wonder about it. And you really have to be serious about listening when someone takes your question seriously and tries to answer it. I have an example I want to give you of a question when I was at the Colorado Children's Campaign that opened doors I never would have imagined. I had been at the Children's Campaign for about 10 years, and someone asked me how I could stand being there year after year. And I was shocked. I really had to think about it. And then I remembered that every time you look at a river, it's a different river. The water is different, the light, the eddies, and yet it's the Colorado or the Arkansas, it's the same river. And I thought about my mother, who, for the most part, sat in the same chair, in the same room, looking out the same window for nearly 30 years. Or my dad, despite huge responsibilities on his shoulders, who was always looking for a way to make something better. A sense of responsibility tied to curiosity can be powerful in a life. These are two of my most important touchstones and I think they led pretty directly to becoming lieutenant governor. So here's the story about the question I asked. In the early 1990s, the voters of Colorado passed ballot initiatives setting term limits on state elected officials. And I thought, well, what does that have to do with the children's campaign? Is this something I need to worry about? And then I noticed that most of the legislators who worked the most with me to reform education or change health care, excuse me, were the graybeards in the legislature, the older ones. And I thought, it must be that they're grandparents, and now they're thinking they have a chance to do it over better again with younger kids. But I thought I better check this out, because a lot was riding on it. So I conducted a survey and asked them, these Colorado allergies, how long they had been in office before they started becoming interested in children's issues. And the answer was 8 years. Well, I was horrified because with term limits, they're in and out in 8 years. How in the world are we going to get the experienced leaders who understand these complicated issues involved? And when I talked to them, it turned out that it had nothing to do with being grandparents. They realized after a while that every year they were voting on about $1 billion worth of services for very high-risk children. This is $1994 dollars. And that they better figure out how to vote smarter. They were doing their jobs. For the children's campaign, what that meant was we had to find a way to accelerate that learning curve so it took place in a year or two, not 8 years. So I did what my mother always did. I assessed the situation, I set a big goal, and I enlisted the help of others. And our goal was to compress 8 years of learning into 1 or 2. And out of that came the 2 best tools we ever had at the children's campaign. The first one was a network of volunteers who agreed to get their own training in children's issues, and as soon as anyone threw their hat in the ring for state office, it didn't matter what party they were in, they would go meet them, form a relationship, start briefing them, and start giving them information about both local kids and state kids. And by the time we were building this network, we had 5,000 people all over the state, and we had legislators coming to us right after they were elected saying, I was told I have to work with you in the children's campaign, so tell me what to do. So I thought, I don't need 8 years. I need people who care about their constituents. This is great. And the other tool that came out of this was so many legislators said, I'm going to make children a big part of my platform, that we formed something called the Kids Caucus. It was bipartisan. They had to agree to support each other's bills unless they had a very strong philosophical reason not to, and they couldn't politicize a bill that dealt with kids. It became the most prestigious group in the legislature. People begged to be appointed to it, and we could pick and choose based on what we thought were their leadership skills and potential. So between the network of volunteers and the caucus with the most respected legislators, we did a lot of really good work at the children's campaign. We created the preschool program for very high-risk kids. We expanded the budget for immunizing uninsured low-income children. I could go on and on. But the connection to becoming lieutenant governor is that that's exactly why Bill Ritter called me, wanting to know if I'd meet him for coffee, because he wanted to make kids a top priority, and he knew that I could work in a bipartisan way, and in politics, what's better than a network already built in? So we were able to combine our passion for pushing forward on how our kids were being treated in our state, and I brought with me this tremendous experience, and it came, I'm convinced, out of that simple little survey, wanting to know when the experienced legislators picked up the torch for kids. Probably the hardest thing I ever did in the public policy arena was also at the Children's Campaign. And it was the most serious test, I think, of the organization's principles and of my touchstone principles. Because of very good work that Governor Bill Owens had been doing around getting a standardized test for kids, it became apparent that there was a huge achievement gap between low-income kids and middle-income kids around math and language arts, and that a zip code was more predictive of how a student would do in school than the school they went to. And in fact, for low-income kids, the longer they were in the public school system, the further behind they fell. Well, what do you do as a child advocate when you have hard data like that coming forward? Problem was that no one had any solutions. The high-performing charter schools that have since emerged didn't exist back then. We didn't have the ability to analyze the public schools that were beating all the odds and doing a really good job of educating all kids. We really didn't have much to work on, but it galvanized education reformers. So one day there was a hearing at the legislature in one of the education committees on the achievement gap, and I went to listen. A mother who was clearly struggling economically came to testify that her 14-year-old son didn't know how to read, and she was very worried about what that meant for his future. A legislator leaned forward and said to her in a very patronizing way, "Oh, we're going to put together a 5-year plan, and it'll start working and things will be better." And she started crying and said, "In 5 years, my son will be out of school, and he won't be able to support a family." And I sat there and thought, if I were that mother, would I have the courage to come to a hearing and share my anguish with legislators and then to be treated like that? And if I were a mother with a son who couldn't read, what would I do? I would use every penny in my checkbook to find another option for him. But I have that option. I have that choice. And my husband and I would do whatever it took. So what do you do for someone who doesn't have those resources? So we agonized, because if we went forward on something like vouchers for low-income struggling kids, we had the chance of losing donations from donors. We might burn bridges with a number of legislators who worked with us on other issues. And the research was pretty clear that most low-income kids who go to a local private school don't do any better than the kids in the public school. So it's not as if that was a solution. But we came down to deciding that at least having the opportunity to try something else should trump everything else. And exactly what we feared came to happen. We lost donors, we lost friends, we lost legislative support. But because we had a very courageous board that was very tuned in to our mission, and we had a courageous governor, Governor Bill Owens, who signed the legislation, we got a bill passed to create a pilot program for targeted, limited vouchers for low-income kids performing poorly in schools, and their schools were ranked as low-performing on the state report card. So all this anguish and struggle to get this opportunity created, and then it was thrown out by the courts as being unconstitutional. But we came out better for it, because when the comfort of adults came up against opportunities for kids, we stood firm for kids. And I didn't know it, but more opportunities came out of that, because even people who didn't agree with us appreciated our courage. They appreciated our focus, and they knew that our motivations were good, even if they didn't agree. I even almost lost being lieutenant governor because of this. The state's teachers union threatened Bill Ritter that if I became his lieutenant governor, they would never support me. And I think it's a great testament to his character that he said, you know, everyone works on things we don't all agree on, but you have to try. You can't just sit still. So almost every day, I won't say every day, in public office has been a day where you have a chance to make a difference. You have a chance to learn something you thought you didn't even know to ask questions about it. It's really been an honor to be in this role. But I, again, can't wait to go back to my private life and be able to work on the issues that I love without having to go out in so many places around the state right now where people are angry and they're not kind to each other when they talk. I think we have to all find ways to get back to civil discourse about the future of our state and our country and get it from where we are now to a place where we can at least have rational discussions about how to go forward. But I know we will do that. I know we will go forward. So I want to close with one of my favorite passages, and this is going to sound a little odd to you in October, but it's from Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. And if you remember, Scrooge is a bitter old businessman from Victorian England at Christmas time. He's visited by Jacob Marley, the ghost of his partner, who's come to give him a chance to change his life and save him from his own doom. Jacob's doom is that in death, he must wander the earth wrapped in a chain of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. If Scrooge can learn to feel charity in his heart, to engage in human matters, he can be saved from Jacob's eternal misery. But Scrooge tries to smooth this over and comfort the ghost. "But you were always a good man of business, Jacob." And the ghost wails. "Business," cried the ghost, wringing his hands again. "Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business." The ghost's agony in Christmas Carol was that in death, he had a deeper understanding of human experience and human failings than in life. In death, he tried, Dickens wrote, to interfere for good in human matters and had lost the power forever. To intervene for good in human matters, to leave things a little better than we find them. And yet, it is because Scrooge was a good businessman that he atones for his greed. He buys, anonymously, the biggest goose in the grocery store and sends it to his clerk's house for dinner. He gives a generous tip to the delivery boy. He buys more coal for the furnace to keep the office warmer. And he has the means to give the care to Tiny Tim that Tiny Tim needs to have his life saved. He was good in business, and he used it to intervene for good. So I think for all of us, to keep alive the spark of curiosity, to leave our campsite a little better than we find it, to intervene for good in human matters, those aren't bad things to strive for. And I do it in the deep sense of building on the example that my parents set for me, and I hope my husband and I set for our children. And I know that Rick knows how much I appreciate this ride that we have taken together. Thank you very much. So I'd be happy to take questions.
some reports are coming out now that if students don't get caught up, particularly in math by 2nd grade, that they're going to be behind for the rest of their academic careers. So in your mind, how best do we fix that? How best do we close that gap?
Well, we know a whole lot more than we did 10 years ago, so I'm actually quite optimistic about it. And I think, obviously, teachers are the key to it, and making sure that the teaching profession is the kind of profession that attracts the best and brightest for long stages of their careers. There's nothing like a verbal, organized, educated person in the role of a teacher to lift a whole classroom. There's no magic about that. It's that teaching and learning interaction. But I think we have a bit of a game changer in technology. We are getting such smart software that's being developed right now that, especially around basic skills, can analyze where kids are and accelerate them where they're strong and help them make up for where they're weak. I've seen this working in pilot programs in the Silicon Valley. So I think a combination of great teaching by people who want to make that profession a big part of their lives and technology to catch up on basic skills, that we have the chance to actually close that gap and get back to having learning and knowledge be something kids embrace instead of run screaming from in middle school.
You've given us your perspective on education and healthcare. How do you believe unemployment and industry and the struggles that it has right now has an adverse effect on that, and what do you do to overcome that challenge?
What are we going to do? Could everyone hear that? Okay, what do I think the economic downturn and unemployment and the struggles of industry, what impact is that having on healthcare, and what should we do about it? Well, I think strictly from a competitiveness perspective, right now we have American companies bearing most of the burden of paying for healthcare insurance. And if you do any kind of global work at all, you're competing with companies where the public sector entirely takes care of healthcare costs. So I think part of what we have to figure out is how do we make sure that for business it's a level playing field, and you're not carrying, if you're in business, more and more the burdens of my generation, who are going to need more and more healthcare as we get older, and figure out the competitiveness angle on that. I also know that while we've been able to keep kids in the healthcare system during this economic downturn, more and more adults have gone off the rolls of the insured as either they lose their jobs or companies have to cut back on benefits. And the health industry will tell you that that just drives up costs for them because people come into the emergency rooms, they're sicker. So we have got, I think, a real social problem that we have to fix. And I support the package that was passed in Congress. I do not think it was perfect. I think a lot of work needs to be done on it. But I also don't think we can sit on our hands while the global competitiveness factor gets worse and more people are ending up in emergency rooms. So I don't have a magic wand that I would wave, but I would certainly engage in trying to come up with more solutions and not just scream and yell about it. I think it's absolutely essential for our economy that we fix something fundamental about how expensive health care is, why we aren't as healthy as people from other countries, and the impact on the economy for that.
How important do you feel charter schools are as we move forward?
And you know the answer to that, don't you? The question is, how important do I think charter schools are in moving forward? Charter schools are public schools that are free from the red tape of a school district. And they were designed, and I was one of the leaders in this effort to create them in Colorado. They were designed to be the research and development arm of public education because it's been so difficult in the past to experiment with public education. And I think charter schools have lived up to that beautifully. We have some of the best charter schools that are the best public schools right here in Denver. We have Denver School of Science and Technology, which is going to expand to 5 different schools over the next several years. We have West Denver Prep, which has an almost entirely Hispanic student body, and they're getting 100% of their kids off to college and their achievement gap closed. So there is a lot to learn from them. But we also know that not all charter schools are good. It's R&D. Some don't work. And I think we have to be very analytical about what can we learn about what works and do more of that and close down what doesn't work and build on our strengths. Right now we get political fights over, well, how many charter schools should there be? That's not the question. The question is, how many good schools can we get, and who cares what we call them? So I think charter schools have been fabulous, but not all of them, and it's now need to learn best lessons and replicate.
Excuse me. I heard you mention earlier, kind of in passing, standardized testing. I was wondering if you're an advocate of standardized testing, and if so, what role you see standardized testing playing in future educational programs?
So the question is, what's my thinking about standardized testing? And I think standardized testing is very crude. We shouldn't be happy with it. But if we hadn't had standardized testing in the late 90s and early part of the 21st century, we wouldn't know that there was such a big achievement gap. The scores of low-income and minority students would have been swept under rugs as they had been for the previous 30 years. So it put a spotlight on the achievement gap. So now we know it's there. They're not diagnostic. They don't help anyone learn better or teach better. So I can't wait for better cost-effective tests to come out. But I think it did a real good service for us in saying we can no longer sweep things under the rug. And if we really believe every student can learn and achieve and go on to post-secondary education, we have to face those numbers and then figure out how to address them. So I think they were essential, but we've got to get better about assessment.
Related question to assessment, in terms of, a lot of previous policies focused on output scores and performance metrics and whatnot, particularly in standardized testing, and that creates an incentive for deception and for corruption because their funding is tied on their test scores and how well kids are doing. So more kind of speaking to like accountability and being able to measure progress within the schools, as well as kind of the question about or just the topic of merit pay and how to ensure that the teachers are doing a job and not just kind of leeching off the system.
So standardized tests in Colorado and in other states around the country have been tied to merit pay for teachers. We're going to tie them to tenure in Colorado, and yet we have plenty of evidence around the country that these high stakes use of tests leads to cheating and people doing illegal things out of desperation that they'll be shown to not have their kids not perform as well as everyone thought. And that's definitely a reality we have to deal with. But like anything else, that shouldn't stop us from getting started. I mean, we have to know that what we're doing in schools and classrooms is boosting student achievement. We are getting our clocks cleaned by countries around the world. We used to be among the top in the world for math and reading. Generally now we're below average, and for the most developed countries in the world, we're bottom, next to bottom. I mean, we just absolutely can't accept where we are, and part of that is starting to understand what teachers and principals with what students produce the best results or don't. It's not going to be perfect, and it's not going to be easy, but I think we at least have to start down that road. And what I hope is that because in Colorado we built a beta year into our period of developing a system like this, we have a year to test it and try and get the bugs out. but I'm hoping that we will be improving it every year as we go along, and that we'll be very cognizant that sometimes you produce desperate behaviors from adults when really what you wanted was a chance to produce better teaching. And so we have to be mindful about the link between testing and tenure or pay or promotion or whatever it is. But we have got to know that we're getting our money's worth out of our public education system, and our kids have to start performing at a much higher level to compete globally with the top countries around the world.
I know recently there's been a lot of regulation of business in different industries in our country. And I was just curious as to your opinion on how we as future business leaders can kind of work to ensure that people continue to have an incentive to do something that they're passionate about and to do something that's going to help them and help their community rather than ending up with everything kind of regulated and centralized.
Regulations seem to come about most often when some group, like in the financial industry or some, oil and natural gas companies, when they don't act in the best interests of their community and they are driven solely by profit, which of course is good, but regulations are in reaction to totally going out of bounds. So the first thing we can do is get people who have a broad perspective of how their business fits into the community or the state or the world, and check themselves against broad excess, so that you don't have a bunch of people coming in anger and then over-regulating. I mean, that's not a healthy cycle, but that seems to be what happens. But at least in Colorado, what we have seen is we had the Ritter Natural Resources team really tried to put in some smart regulations that would do a better job of balancing energy production with sportsmen and water sports and ranchers, and yet our need for energy. And it was a really, really bloody battle for a couple of years. And we heard, that all sorts of unemployment would shoot up because of it. But in reality, we've now been praised by oil and gas trade associations for how, what kind of national models those regulations are. And the people out in those communities are much happier because they're not waking up one morning and finding a drill going in through their alfalfa field because mineral rights supersede farming rights. So, a lot of times I think instead of trying to fight any regulation, we ought to come together and try and solve the problem. And the problem was, mining companies going wherever they wanted because they had rights, and it didn't matter if a rancher had a field that he was trying to do something with. So I think we create a lot of our own conflict just by wanting all or nothing, and we ought to realize that we're a complicated state with complicated communities, and lots of people have interests in things, and do a better job of problem solving together.
Hi, I'd like to go back to education for a moment. You made a reference to early childhood education and the strides that have been made. And recent studies show the effectiveness of parental involvement and good parental education in helping raise students, raise learners, raise readers. Is there additional consideration for parent ed in preparing children to be successes in school?
So do you mean applying that research about parental involvement to the K-12 system?
No, to the early years.
Early years?
Yes.
It is, the role of parents is woven into as much early childhood education as we possibly can. So we always ask for centers or programs to offer parent training programs, to have parents check in and have a chance for the teacher to talk to them morning and afternoon when they drop off and pick up kids. But fundamentally, we subsidize early childhood education in this state to let the parents hold a steady job and get the family economically on its feet, and to increase the likelihood the child will succeed in school. So if the parents don't buy in to parent involvement, it's still up to these programs to get the kids ready, school ready, by the time they go to kindergarten. So it's absolutely fundamentally important. But if you're in a public program, you're low income, your family's struggling, and we don't accept it as an excuse that if the parent's not involved, the child isn't expected to do well. It's easier if the parent's involved, but it's the job of the program to get the kids ready for school, and that's what they're evaluated on. Yes.
Good evening. My name's Steve Coffrin. So you touched on an important point about hard work. My question to you is, how do we instill that value of hard work and break the mindset of entitlements to the upcoming generations, especially with the global competition that we'll be facing?
So the question has to do with instilling hard work into people and breaking the sense of entitlement. And I would say we start with school-age kids. I mean, how many times have we all read in the news that the parents supported the child, not the teacher, when they got in trouble? I mean, this is our society. This is our adult colleagues who aren't even demanding this of their children. So I think a lot of it has to start with our attitude as adults in the community about how hard you work, your kids work, and kids are kids. You know, they're gonna mess up and act up, but who do you support? Even if you think the teacher overreacted, do you go sue? I mean, I think we all have to look at ourselves and see if this cynicism about people in roles of authority has really done us a disservice about teaching our kids to be a little more respectful of authority and work hard for their approval. So I know what you're talking about, something bigger, but it's very hard once people are adults. But we have kids for 12 or 13 years in a classroom, and we have them in our homes. And we can start to shape the next generation to go back to the values we all remember as making our state and our country so great.
Yeah, I'd like to hear your thoughts on the state's recent budget cutbacks in higher education and what alternatives were possibly on the table.
Oh. And so the question has to do with the cuts to higher education and what alternatives there are. There are more to come, sadly. We're facing having to cut about $250 million more from this year's budget, and next year another $650 more, because the sales tax receipts and income to the state have continued to decline. So the reality is the cuts are going to have to come from somewhere, and there are very few places in the budget that aren't protected. So what we have been talking about is there a way, and I have to say, there is no fat left in state government. I mean, everything is really down to the bone. And yet we're trying to make sure that the infrastructure that lets the next generation have the opportunities we have, so higher education, technical training, all those things, to make sure that's there and affordable to them. So there's a wonderful process that is being spearheaded by DU around taking a look at changes in the state constitution that need to be made. We are looking at what could we go to the voters and ask them to fund around higher education. There's a group headed up by some business people looking at that. So we are exploring every opportunity that we can see on the horizon. But in the short term, the fact is that there are going to be more cuts, and it's going to hurt the affordability of higher education. And I wish that weren't true, but we can't sugarcoat it. And we really need everyone to start talking around the kitchen table and around their communities about, you know, there are some things that you absolutely have to build for the future, and one is higher education. You know, roads we understand, prisons we understand. Higher education is a tough sell in Colorado. The voting public tends to think, well, you ought to just go pay for it yourself, but there's almost no one in this room that paid for it themselves. You're all taking advantage. You're all taking advantage of what generations before you put into place. And I think we have to figure out our obligation to the young people coming behind us to also have affordable chances to get education and training.
Thank you.
I think maybe one more.
Yeah, thank you for your speech. I'm Young at Daniels. I want to ask a question about leadership. You say, as the Lieutenant Governor, you need to have some policy, some vision to execute. But how do you handle this? How do you perceive different paths to do this? You know, political system is so complicated. I want to hear some of your tips.
Would you mind repeating that for me?
Yeah, I want to learn something about leadership. How do you make your vision, you know, your policy to let the others to understand this? You know, you see political system is so complicated. How do you coordinate different parts? I mean,
you know, letting people know what your policy positions and your vision for the state are in a state like Colorado is complicated. We're very committed to local control, so we have a lot of decentralized decision making, and the only way you can do that is go all over the state talking to Rotary clubs and Kiwanis clubs and high school graduations and community college town meetings to get your message out. It really takes a whole lot of connecting around the state, but I think the strength to that compared to places like Pennsylvania or New York, now they're probably going to get mad at me, but you know, there they can do so many things top down, they don't really care if they've brought people along with them. Here, you've got to bring people along with you. You've got to really invest in the conversation and the idea exchange to get people to sort of have a statewide consensus. So we in Colorado have to do much more upfront work to get there, but then we go forward more often than not as a unified state. And I've seen other states where they don't have to put that work in up front and they pay for it later as, you know, organizations and companies and people try to wiggle out of it. So I actually think it's a better way here. It's just, you're right, in a big state like this, it's hard to get around and build a consensus, but if you do it, you really have a chance to go forward without a lot of pushback later on. So I want to thank you for inviting me. I want you to know I have spent a long time thinking about how to be a voice of experience. It's a daunting assignment. And I can't wait to hear some of the other people who come to speak to you, because this is a wonderful speaker series and a privilege to be here with you tonight. Thank you very much.
Well, I'd say that's a pretty good start to the speaker series, wouldn't you? Let's give her another round of applause. I know Barbara mentioned this, but education reform definitely is everyone's business, whether you're a business leader, a community leader, or you're in the education field. This past year, Barbara worked with us in the Daniels College of Business, along with our partners in the Mortgage College of Education here at DU and its Dean, Greg Anderson, and our community partner, Get Smart Schools, to start an MBA in school leadership. It's just one small step, and there's so many things that we all need to do. I invite you to join us in the reception area out in the front lobby so that you can come up and talk with Lieutenant Governor O'Brien and ask her what you can do to make a difference in our initiatives around education reform. I'd also like to take a moment, as I mentioned in the beginning introduction, certainly I think Lieutenant Governor O'Brien represents a leader that has purpose, that has passion, and brings the attitude of bring it on. I know that she has left the state of Colorado better than she found it, and please join me again in thanking her for what she has done for this state and what I know she's going to continue to do on our behalf and for our children and for ourselves in education and healthcare reform. Thank you. forward to seeing you in November with Peter Swinburne, the CEO of Molson Coors, and again for a rousing debate around healthcare in January with 3 significant CEOs. Thank you again for coming, and we look forward to seeing you in the lobby.
Apple juice is